welcome to the TEDx. So, as I mentioned, thank you for coming today. You had a lot of great choices. I'm honored that you came to hear my story. The title, Teaching in Two Genders, was a bit provocative for two reasons. The first is that gender is not binary, it's a spectrum. So if you came here to point that out, I'm really glad that you've come to support us. The second is that I'm the first trans instructor that I know of here. There may have been others, and I'd like to know that I wasn't the only one. I'd like to believe that there were others. So after my intro, I'm hoping that I will have eased your nerves and that you'll feel comfortable enough to ask questions that you wouldn't necessarily ask your trans friends or trans students. So I've set up a Slido session, an anonymous Slido session, so you can submit your questions anonymously, which is a great way to break the ice, as we know. So, and I'll put this up again at the end. There are a few cards going around, and you should probably all have emails as well. So, imagine that your doctor told you that your condition would only get worse if you continued doing what you had been doing for the last 50 years. Would it be easy for you to give up what had become a comfortable habit? Would it be easy for you to give up something like that if it was killing you slowly? That was the question that I faced over 9 years ago when I decided to get help for my gender dysphoria. I was growing more anxious and depressed with time, and I called a psychologist and asked her whether I could take an antidepressant and whether that would help me. This was a psychologist from our Employee and Family Assistance Program, whose number you might find on the back of your benefits card. She said that no, gender identity was something intrinsic to my personality, to my being, and that taking an antidepressant wouldn't really help that. It wasn't the answer that I was hoping for. That would have been the easy path, taking an antidepressant. Popping a pill every day would have kept me on the same easy path that I had been on since I left high school. And straying off that path was what led David to become a werewolf in American Werewolf in London. What caused Dorothy to succumb to opium poisoning in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And straying off the path is what caused Little Red Riding Hood to end up in the wolf's stomach. So I really couldn't do much without risking the disappointment of my family, friends, and peers. So yeah, straying off that path was one of the hardest things that I ever had to do after years of conditioning. I was programmed to keep things as they were, and when anything changed, I became anxious, as many of you probably do. I did have some experience with change over the years, as all of you do. I was raised in a small town of 800, and I did various jobs since the age of 15, including fast food potato washer, lawnmower, industrial worker, camp counselor, and even a nursing assistant. So change was really built into my life from a very early age. I also made quite a few significant moves. I moved 3,000 kilometers west to Los Angeles to work on my PhD in neuroscience. Then I moved 1,800 kilometers north to Seattle to do postdoctoral work in pharmacology. Then I moved 4,800 kilometers east to Connecticut for my first professorship in neurophysiology. And then I moved back here to Vancouver, another 5,000 kilometers, to do clinical development, medical writing, and project management for 2 biotechs and 1 large multinational pharmaceutical company. Each of these moves came with significant personal, professional, and financial changes in my life. So, What would you do if your doctor told you that you had to change your life? Like every other animal on the planet, we're wired to avoid pain and to seek joy. Freud called it the pleasure principle. In my case, when I realized that I needed to change genders, the pain was anxiety, depression, and gender dysphoria. That gender dysphoria was due to a mismatch between my own gender identity from the brain and the gender that I was assigned at birth. And I'd reached a point where I couldn't look at myself in the mirror, I couldn't listen to my own voice, and I struggled to put on the clothes that I had worn for many, many years. That was the pain that I needed to escape. Joy from changing gender wasn't anything that I had ever contemplated. What positive could come from changing genders? Without a positive, making that change was impossible. Without a pleasure to seek, it was tough. So pain could force me to start to change. It could force me out of that habit. But I needed some positive, some joy to keep me from sliding backwards, to make that change permanent. So you can see the joy in this crow sliding down a snowy rooftop on a lid. Its motivation is simple pleasure. We all look for those moments of pure joy to outweigh moments of pain. It's also this joy that can help motivate us to learn new things, like snowboarding, and achieve the goals that we dream of. So, how many of those goals that we dream of, those New Year's resolutions, survive until spring? Often the pain isn't enough to bump us out of that habit, or the joy isn't attractive enough to keep us there, to make that change permanent. Before I committed to transitioning, I decided to make a list of all of the risks and the benefits in that order. The risks included losing friends and family, losing my job, losing the esteem of my colleagues and students, and my self-esteem if I ended up slipping backwards. So this was 2015, and gender identity wasn't added to the BC Human Rights Code until July of 2016. I hoped that my union would have my back, but when I read the collective agreement, gender identity wasn't part of the non-discrimination clause, nor was it added to nor gender affirming care added to our benefits. Another risk was that lack of support from students and colleagues would make me uncomfortable enough to want to quit. So the benefits, where's that joy? The benefits of transitioning included being able to look at myself in the mirror and shower again, being able to listen to my own voice, feeling comfortable in my own body and personal interactions, and the feeling that I wasn't hiding something important from the important people in my life. And it was hard to weigh those risks against the benefits, but learning ways to mitigate the risk could also help to tip the balance. Listing those risks also helped me to step back and see the bigger picture, and the positives, seeing a happy ending. So in my case, I was hopeful that friends and family would support me, but I also knew that by finding chosen family, I would have supporters to help me if some friends and family fell by the wayside. So that was one mitigation. I also hoped that our students would be supportive. They have hopes of careers in their chosen fields. They treat the classroom a bit more like a workplace. They're also more aware of gender identity and have more friends who are gender diverse. So I hope that my students will be supportive. When I came out to my first group of students, they proved me right. They actually asked me which pronouns I used. And I hadn't really even stopped to consider my pronouns. I was so concerned about my hair, my name, my voice, my clothes, but I hadn't stopped to think about pronouns. So the next thing that helped me to transition in retrospect was testing the waters of change. I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but in 2014, I came out as vegan, one of the hardest things to do, and I pierced my ears. So, indeed, I wasn't even thinking about gender at the time. And I faced some resistance, not surprisingly. Some friends said that eating vegan was unhealthy. My partner, Sarah, was worried that we would never be able to eat meals together again. But we made it work. And we had fun exploring new recipes. It built better communication between us, and it strengthened our relationship. And piercing ears was something that I'd always wanted to do. And it was really one of the very first things that I had done for significant things that I'd done for myself in many, many years. And it helped me to focus on what would make me happy when I needed to overcome the resistance of those around me to that change. So, the next big step was coming out. Coming out to family was the hardest thing that I ever had to do, but coming out was actually one of the most important steps in committing to change. It was not so much that family had to hold me to it, because that would have made it worse. They would have resented me for nagging them. But it was important for me to commit to that change, and it drove me to follow the path that I was trying to follow, and build a happier life for myself. So the memory of telling them was what helped to drive me forward. Like the crying loop that Sarah and I got into, the morning of March 16th, 2016, the middle of spring break, when I came out to her before work. I know, bad timing. So, coming out to Sarah, my partner of over 30 years at the time, could have gone either way. But when she accepted the uncertainty of the future, I was able to start making plans. So you've probably heard that when you need to plan something, taking a very big task is better broken into smaller tasks. And transitioning is no different. I had to plan the many social and medical aspects of transitioning along the way. And I did them without putting dates on them. As I mentioned, I'd been a project manager, so I knew the value of a Gantt chart. And I decided not to use a Gantt chart for my transition because many of the steps were out of my control. I needed to wait for doctor's appointments, and I needed to schedule surgeries, and setting and missing those arbitrary dates would have killed any sense of progress. So what did I do instead? Having that list was really important, and making that list with items checked off can build a sense of progress. So starting that list with things that are trivial, with things that are already completed, even better, is a great way to move everything along. So here's a short list. Come out as vegan, check. Pierce ears, check. Schedule appointment with a psychologist, check. Come out to Sarah, check. The next one was getting help from a doctor. So that was next. So once that proverbial ball got rolling, 6 months into it, I found myself feeling more comfortable as female in public and at home. And I realized I needed to come out here at work. So what was it like to end one term, giving finals, presenting as male, and then stepping back into the classroom January 4th, 2017, as female? Before, I often had students who would ask questions in class. They would come to office hours. They would ask me to be a job reference. And some actually went to rate my professor and gave me positive reviews, a place where students often go to complain. And as chair of the Research Ethics Board, faculty accepted my reviews, appreciated my opinions on the research proposals. Afterwards, I'm going to say the students were great. As I mentioned, they asked me my pronouns. Maybe they respected my openness. Maybe I still carried a bit of male privilege. One group of students even gave me flowers. And quantitatively, my reviews really didn't change much. We'll get into that later. And we had a great time learning in class and labs. So everything kind of continued on as normal. But qualitatively, those little things, students stopped asking questions in class. They stopped coming to office hours. They stopped asking to be a job reference. And some were more disruptive and aggressive in class. And some faculty said that they wouldn't even apply for ethics approval. Most of this was probably due to being female. I also experienced dead naming, so some unintentionally used my old name. I experienced misgendering, so either the unintentional, in some cases intentional, misuse of pronouns, and microaggressions, which are all too common for those of us in the minority. Some colleagues were unaware of the differences between transitioning due to gender identity, cross-dressing, and drag. So there wasn't as much awareness then. And they thought that I would come to work wearing heels, dresses, much more makeup. For the record, I've never worn heels. I'm a lesbian. And I've never seen Drag Race. So the Venn diagram of transitioning due to gender identity, cross-dressing, and drag does have a little bit of overlap. There are a minority of those who cross-dress who might identify with the gender that they dress in. There's also a minority of those who do drag who identify in the gender that they do drag in. But you can see that the majority of people who cross-dress or do drag are cisgender. They identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. Whereas those of us who transition due to gender identity don't do it for the clothes. We don't do it for performance, as in drag. We do it to be comfortable in our own skin. So fortunately, as I mentioned, the students and colleagues were respectful here. As a Polytechnic, our culture is more like a workplace than a university, and it's a fairly safe place to transition. Others have studied gender differences in the classroom, and they found that there is a gender bias in the classroom. They found that female instructors get lower ratings from their male students than their female students, and male instructors seem to get roughly the same rating from both their male and female students. So there's an expectation going on here. As a result, if you do the math, female instructors then on average get lower ratings in the studies. If you look at anonymous self-reporting, like Rate My Professor, you see giant gender differences, especially in the language that's used to describe instructors. Female instructors are more often described as unfair. They're described as nasty. They're described as unprofessional. And they're described as disorganized. And many other negative adjectives. And you can see that these differences persist across disciplines. Maybe there are a few exceptions, but it's a thing. So in my case, we changed over to electronic evaluations shortly after I transitioned. And with those electronic reviews, many fewer students, maybe 2 or 3 per class, decided to submit them. And due to that small sample size and self-selection, I decided not to look at them anymore. I needed something to improve my teaching. So I decided that I would go back to the paper forms that we used to use. There wasn't scanning anymore. So what I found most useful in teaching was the back page. These last two questions. So I copied that page, gave it to the students, left the room, had the students collect them, and set them aside until after marks were in. So that's what I used to get the feedback that I needed. So yeah, gender biases are alive and well in the classroom, but knowing it, we can adjust our review systems and help us get the feedback that we need to improve our teaching. So what did I learn, making another big change in my life? I learned to scan by identifying pain and pleasure motivators, which is useful to understand what motivates me, by listing the risks and benefits in that order to get a sense of the positives of the progress, so focusing on the happy ending. I learned to plan by figuring out how to mitigate the risks, to keep them from derailing my plans, by testing the waters of change, to learn how others react around me and then navigate that change with them, and making a list of steps with some items checked off, which can help build momentum in that change. And finally, I learned to go by coming out to create that self-accountability, and also learning to let things take as much time as they need, because sometimes a Gantt chart can be a real downer. Not every change that we make needs to be as big as a gender change, but with planning and patience, we can change our lives for the better. Thank you.